The metal chair was too small for Zethkri's massive frame. His thick scales scraped against the cold steel as he shifted, the heavy chains around his wrists making a harsh sound in the quiet room. The alien warrior sat hunched forward, his yellow eyes fixed on the floor, but his mind was far from this sterile prison. 3 judges sat across from him at a curved table. The first was a tall, thin creature with blue skin and no hair. The second looked like a walking tree with bark-like skin and glowing green eyes. The third was small and round, covered in soft gray fur with large black eyes. All 3 wore the same dark robes that marked them as members of the Galactic Coalition's High Court. "State your name and rank for the record," the blue-skinned judge said. His voice was cold and formal. Zethkri lifted his head slowly. His reptilian features were hard to read, but there was something in his eyes that made the judges uncomfortable. "Commander Zethkri of the Saurian Empire's 3rd Fleet, serial number 4478 Alpha 9. The tree-like judge leaned forward. "You were captured after the Battle of Kepler 442. Your entire fleet was destroyed by human forces. We want to know how this happened." A low rumble came from Zethkri's throat. It might have been laughter, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know how they won? How a species that just learned to travel between stars defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy?" The small furry judge spoke up. "The humans had been in space for less than 50 years. Your empire has conquered worlds for over 1,000 years. By all logic, you should have crushed them easily." Zethkri's claws scraped against the table as he placed his hands flat on the surface. "Logic. Yes, we thought logic would win this. War. We thought our superior technology and numbers would make quick work of these soft creatures. We were wrong." The blue judge made a note on his tablet. "Explain." For a long moment, Zethkri said nothing. His eyes seemed to be looking at something the judges could not see. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but somehow more frightening. "Before the war started, we studied the humans. We watched their cities, counted their ships, measured their weapons. Everything we learned told us they were weak. They had only recently unified their own planet. They had fought among themselves for their entire history. Their technology was primitive compared to ours." The tree judge shifted in his seat. "Then, what went wrong? What went wrong?" Zethkri repeated. "What went wrong was that we did not understand what their history of fighting meant. We saw their wars as a weakness. We thought it proved they were violent and stupid." "We were fools?" The small judge's ears twitched. "Their wars were a strength." Zethkri's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Their wars were their training. Every battle they fought on their homeworld was a lesson. Every defeat taught them something new. Every victory showed them a better way to fight. When we came to conquer them, we were not fighting a young species. We were fighting the graduates of the most brutal military school in the galaxy." The blue judge set down his tablet. "You're being dramatic. They're just humans." "They're not special? Not special?" Zethkri's voice rose. "Do you know what they call warfare? Do you know how long they have been perfecting the art of killing?" The judges exchanged glances. The tree creature spoke first. "Enlighten us." Zethkri leaned back in his chair. The chains around his wrists clinked softly. "When we first encountered them, we captured several of their ships. Among the prisoners was a female human named Professor Helen Burke. She was a teacher, someone who studied their history. We thought she might have useful information about their military capabilities." The small judge made a note. "What did she tell you?" "She told us stories. Stories she thought were harmless. She spoke of battles fought thousands of years ago, of warriors who had been dead for centuries. She thought she was sharing mythology, ancient tales that had no bearing on modern warfare." Zethkri's eyes gleamed with something that might have been fear. "She told us about a place called Troy, a city that was under siege for 10 years. 10 years the humans fought for one city. She told us about warriors who fought with bronze weapons and wooden shields. She made it sound like a children's story." The tree judge leaned forward. "But it wasn't? It was real. Every word of it. And it was just the beginning. She told us about Romans who built an empire that lasted for centuries. She spoke of generals who conquered nations with tactics that seemed simple but were actually brilliant. She described battles where thousands died for a few miles of ground. The blue judge interrupted. Ancient history. What does this have to do with modern space warfare? Zethkri's claws extended slightly. Everything, do you not see? These humans have been fighting for 10,000 years. Every generation learned from the last. Every war taught them something new. They have tried every possible way to kill each other, and they remember all of it. The small judge's eyes widened. You're saying their entire history prepared them for war? I'm saying their entire history is war. When we studied their planet, we found evidence of conflict everywhere. Battlefields, fortresses, monuments too. They're dead. They even have schools where they study nothing but war. They call it military history, and they teach it to their children. The room fell silent. The judges looked at each other, then back at the alien warrior. The tree creature was the first to speak. Even if this is true, they still lack our advanced technology. Our ships are faster, our weapons more powerful. Zethkri's laugh was cold. Yes, our technology is superior. But what good is a superior weapon if you do not know how to use it? What good is a faster ship if you fly it into a trap? The blue judge frowned. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that we had never really fought a war. Oh, we had conquered planets, but that was different. We would arrive with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and usually get it. The few species that resisted were quickly crushed by our superior numbers and weapons. Zethkri's voice grew quieter. The humans did not surrender. They did not run. They fought like their ancestors had taught them, with a fury and intelligence that we could not match. They used tactics that were older than our civilization, but they made them work with modern weapons. The small judge leaned forward. Give us an example. Admiral Corenstone, she commanded the human fleet at Proxima Centauri. When our ships moved to surround her forces, she did something we had never seen before. She pretended to retreat, drawing us into a trap. Then she attacked from 3 directions at once. The tree judge made a note. That doesn't sound particularly complex. It wasn't. That was the genius of it. She used a tactic that human generals had used for thousands of years. It was called a feint, a trick to make the enemy think you were weaker than you really were. We fell for it completely because we had never encountered such deception in battle. The blue judge set down his pen. One battle doesn't prove anything. Zethkri's eyes flashed. One battle? There were hundreds of battles. And in every single one, the humans fought like they had been preparing for that exact moment their entire lives? Because they had been. Their whole species had been preparing for war since they first picked up stones to throw at each other. The room fell silent again. The judges looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Finally, the tree creature spoke. You're saying we underestimated them. I'm saying we never understood them at all. We thought we were fighting a young species that had just learned to travel between stars. What we discovered was that we were fighting the descendants of warriors who had been perfecting the art of war for millennia. Zethkri looked at each judge in turn. You want to know how they won? Then you must understand their history. You must learn what they call war. Only then will you understand why we never stood a chance. The blue judge leaned back in his chair. You said Professor Burke told you stories? Tell us about these stories. Zethkri's claws drummed against the metal table. She started with the oldest ones. Stories about warriors who lived 3,000 years ago. She spoke of a war that lasted 10 years over a single city. She called it the Trojan War. The small furry judge tilted his head. 10 years for one city? That seems wasteful. That's what we thought too. But Professor Burke explained that it wasn't about the city. It was about honor, about pride, about showing strength to other nations. The humans called it a siege, and they were very good at it. Zethkri's eyes grew distant. She told us about warriors named Achilles and Hector. They fought in single combat while their armies watched. When one died, the other side would mourn him as a brave enemy. We thought this was strange. Why would you honor an enemy? The tree judge made a note. What else did she tell you? She told us about the Greeks who fought at a place called Thermopylae. 300 warriors held off an army of thousands. They knew they would die, but they fought anyway. They bought time for their city to prepare for war. The blue judge frowned. That's suicide, not strategy. That's what we thought. But Professor Burke explained that their sacrifice saved thousands of other lives. The enemy was delayed long, enough for the Greek city-states to unite and fight back. The 300 warriors became legends. Their story inspired other humans to fight harder. Zethkria's voice grew quieter. She told us their king, Leonidas, was given a choice. He could surrender and live, or fight and die. He chose to fight. When the enemy demanded, he laid down his weapons, he said. Come and take them. Then he and his men fought until the last one fell. The small judge's ears drooped. They chose death over surrender. They chose honor over life. And their sacrifice meant something. It showed other humans that some things were worth dying for. It taught them that a small force could hold off a much larger one if they chose the right place to fight. The tree judge leaned forward. These are just old stories, myths and legends. Zethkria's laugh was bitter. That's what we thought. But Professor Burke had evidence. She showed us their writings, their art, their monuments. She had detailed records of how these battles were fought, what weapons were used, what tactics worked, and what didn't. The blue judge made a note. What kind of tactics? The Greeks used a formation called a phalanx. Warriors with long spears, and shields would stand shoulder to shoulder. The shields would overlap, creating a wall of bronze and steel. The spears would point forward, creating a forest of sharp points that enemies could not get through. Zethkria's claws scraped the table. It sounds simple, but it required incredible discipline. Each warrior had to trust the man beside him completely. If one man broke and ran, the whole formation would collapse. But if they held together, they could defeat armies much larger than their own. The small judge looked confused. But surely, this has nothing to do with modern warfare? That's what we thought. But when we fought the humans in space, they used similar tactics. Their ships would form tight formations, overlapping their shields and coordinating their fire. When we tried to break through, we found ourselves facing the same wall of discipline that had stopped armies on their home world. The tree judge shifted in his seat. Tell us more about these ancient stories? Zethkri closed his eyes for a moment. Professor Burke told us about a general named Alexander. He conquered most of the known world before he was 30 years old. She said he learned from the best teachers, including a philosopher named Aristotle. The blue judge looked interested. A philosopher teaching warfare? The humans don't separate wisdom from fighting. They study both together. Alexander learned about politics, philosophy, and military strategy. He used all of this knowledge to conquer an empire that stretched from Greece to India. Zethkri's voice grew more animated. Alexander never lost a battle. He would study his enemies, learn their weaknesses, and then attack at exactly the right moment. He was brave enough to lead from the front, but smart enough to plan carefully before each fight. The small judge's eyes widened. He led from the front? Human leaders often fight alongside their soldiers. They share the danger, the hardship, the risk of death. This makes their warriors loyal and brave. When soldiers see their leader willing to die for them, they become willing to die for him. The tree judge made a note. This Alexander sounds unusual. He was the first of many. Professor Burke told us about Julius Caesar, who conquered all of Gaul and then crossed a river called the Rubicon to take control of Rome itself. She told us about his tactics, his speeches to his soldiers, his political skills. Zethkri leaned forward. Caesar wrote down everything he learned. He described his battles in detail, explaining what worked and what didn't. Other human generals studied his writings and learned from his victories and defeats. The blue judge looked puzzled. They shared their military secrets? They shared everything. Knowledge, tactics, strategies, even their failures. Each generation of human warriors learned from the last. They built on what had come before, making it better, stronger, more effective. The small judge's ears perked up. So their knowledge grew over time? Exactly. Professor Burke showed us their military. Academies, schools where they taught nothing but war. Students would study battles from thousands of years ago, learning why they were won or lost. They would practice the same tactics their ancestors had used, but with modern weapons. Zethkria's voice grew darker. She told us about the Roman legions, professional soldiers who served for 25 years. They were trained to march in perfect formation, to build fortifications quickly, to fight as a unit rather than individuals. The tree judge looked uncomfortable. Professional soldiers? War was their job. They were paid to fight, equipped with the best weapons, and trained constantly. A Roman legion could march 20 miles in a day, then build a fortified camp before dark. They could fight in any weather, on any terrain, against any enemy. The blue judge set down his pen. This sounds like a very militaristic society. All human societies are militaristic. Even the peaceful ones have armies. Even the ones that claim to love peace study war. Professor Burke told us about their military universities, where they train officers to command hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Zethkrisa's claws extended slightly. She told us about Napoleon, a general who conquered most of Europe. He reorganized his armies, promoted soldiers based on ability rather than birth, and created new tactics that changed warfare forever. The small judge leaned forward. What kind of tactics? He moved his armies faster than anyone thought possible. He would concentrate his forces at the enemy's weakest point, break through their lines, and then roll up their flanks. He won battle after battle using speed and surprise. The tree judge made a note, but surely he was eventually defeated. Yes, but not before he had changed the way humans think about war. His tactics were studied and copied by other generals. His ideas about organization, logistics, and command became standard practice for human armies. Zethkria's voice grew softer. Professor Burke explained that humans don't just fight wars, they study them. They analyze every battle, every decision, every mistake. They have libraries full of books about warfare, schools that teach nothing. But military history, the blue judge looked skeptical. And you believe this made them better warriors? I believe it made them unbeatable. When we fought them, we were not fighting individual humans. We were fighting the accumulated knowledge of thousands of years of warfare. Every tactic they used had been tested in battle, refined by experience, and passed down through generations. The small judge's eyes were wide. They never forgot anything. They never forgot anything. Professor Burke told us about their civil war, where brother fought against brother. The generals on both sides had studied the same battles, learned from the same teachers, read the same books. The war lasted 4 years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Zethkria's voice grew quiet. But even in that terrible conflict, they learned new things. They discovered how to use railways to move armies, how to coordinate attacks across vast distances, how to supply millions of soldiers in the field. The tree judge shifted uncomfortably. These humans sound very dangerous. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because they are stronger or smarter than us, but because they have been preparing for war since they first learned to make weapons. Every generation has added to their knowledge, refined their skills, perfected their craft. The blue judge leaned back. So when you encountered them in space, we were not fighting a young species. We were fighting the heirs of Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon. We were fighting warriors who had learned from 10,000 years of battle. We never stood a chance. Zethkri looked at each judge in turn, and that was just their ancient history. Professor Burke had much more to tell. Yes, about their modern wars. Wars that made their ancient battles look like children's games. The 3 judges sat in uncomfortable silence. The blue one finally spoke. You mentioned their modern wars. What did Professor Burke tell you about those? Zethkria's scales darkened to a deeper shade of green. She told us about wars that made their ancient battles look like games between children. Wars where millions died. Wars that lasted for years and changed their entire world. The small judge's ears twitched nervously. Millions? In their first global war, they called it the Great War. Over 15 million people died. Professor Burke showed us pictures of battlefields that stretched for hundreds of miles. She told us about trenches where soldiers lived like animals, fighting for tiny pieces of ground. Zethria's voice grew quieter. She told us about a place called Verdun. French and German soldiers fought there for 10 months. The French lost over 160,000 men. The Germans lost almost as many. When the battle was over, the land was so torn up by explosions that nothing could grow there for years. The tree judge leaned forward. They fought for 10 months over one piece of ground? They fought for 10 months over a few square miles. Professor Burke said it was about more than just the land. It was about proving which side was stronger, which side could endure more suffering. The French had a saying, "They shall not pass." And they didn't pass, no matter how many died. The blue judge made a note. What kind of weapons were they using? Weapons that could kill thousands in a single day. They had artillery that could fire shells 20 miles. They had machine guns that could cut down hundreds of men in minutes. They even used poison gas that would burn a soldier's lungs from the inside. Zethria's claws scraped against the table. But the worst part was how they fought. Professor Burke told us about soldiers who would climb out of their trenches and walk toward the enemy guns. They knew they would probably die, but they did it anyway because their officers ordered them to. The small judge's eyes were wide. They walked into machine gun fire. On the first day of a battle called the Somme, 60,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded. Many of them were cut down before they had walked 100 yards. But the next day, more soldiers climbed out of the trenches and tried again. The tree judge shifted uncomfortably. That sounds like madness. That's what we thought. But Professor Burke explained that it wasn't madness, it was discipline. These soldiers had been trained to obey orders no matter what. They trusted their commanders even when those commanders sent them to die. Zethria's voice grew darker. She told us about a soldier named Jake Morrison. He was ordered to hold a position while his unit retreated. He stayed in a shell crater for 3 days, fighting off German attacks. His entire squad was dead, but he kept fighting because those were his orders. The blue judge frowned. One man held off an entire enemy force. One man with a rifle and a few grenades. He had no food, no water, no hope of rescue. But he had his duty. When rescue finally came, they found him still alive, still fighting. He had killed over 30 enemy soldiers. The small judge's ears drooped. Why didn't he retreat? Because he was human. Professor Burke said that humans have something they call honor. It's more important to them than life itself. Jake Morrison would rather die than abandon his post. And he was not unusual. She told us hundreds of similar stories. The tree judge made a note. What happened after this great war? They fought an even bigger war 20 years later. This one they called World War II. Over 70 million people died. Professor Burke said it was the most destructive conflict in human history. Zethria's eyes grew distant. She told us about the siege of a city called Stalingrad. German and Soviet soldiers fought house by house, room by room, for months. The city was completely destroyed, but neither side would give up. The blue judge looked confused. They destroyed the city they were fighting for. They destroyed everything. Buildings, bridges, factories, homes. The fighting was so fierce that soldiers would fight for control of a single building for weeks. Professor Burke said that sometimes enemies would be on different floors of the same building, throwing grenades at each other through holes in the floor. The small judge's voice was barely a whisper. How many died? Over 2 million soldiers and civilians? The city became a graveyard, but the Soviets held it. They said every building was a fortress, every street was a battlefield. They had a saying, not one step back. Zethria's claws extended. Professor Burke told us about Captain Lisa Grant. She was wounded in the leg during a street fight, but she kept leading her men. When her position was overrun, she grabbed a machine gun and held off the enemy while her soldiers escaped. She died, but her sacrifice saved 20 men. The tree judge's bark-like skin had gone pale. These humans seemed to have no regard for their own lives. They regard their lives as tools to be used for something greater. Professor Burke explained that humans believe some things are worth dying for. Freedom, duty, protecting others, defending their homes. This makes them incredibly dangerous enemies. The blue judge set down his pen. Tell us more about this second war. The humans developed new ways to kill each other. They built aircraft that could drop bombs on cities hundreds of miles away. They created tanks that could smash through any defense. They even learned to fight underwater with submarines. Zethkri's voice grew quieter. But the most terrifying thing was their willingness to sacrifice themselves. Professor Burke told us about the D-Day invasion. Allied soldiers stormed beaches, defended by machine guns and artillery. Thousands died in the first few hours, but more kept coming. The small judge's ears were flat against his head. They kept attacking despite the casualties? They kept attacking because of the casualties. Every dead soldier made the others more determined. Professor Burke said that Lieutenant Paul Green led his men up a cliff while bullets flew around. Half his unit was killed, but he kept climbing. When they reached the top, he was still fighting. The tree judge's leaves rustled with agitation. What drove them to such extremes? Hatred, but not just any hatred. Professor Burke told us about something called the Holocaust. The German government had decided to murder an entire people, the Jews. They built factories designed just for killing. They murdered 6 million civilians. Zethkri's voice became very quiet. When the Allied soldiers discovered these killing factories, they understood what they were really fighting against. It wasn't just a war between nations anymore. It was a war between good and evil. The blue judge's skin had turned a darker shade. They built factories for murder, factories with gas chambers, crematoriums, and mass graves. Professor Burke showed us pictures. I still see them when I close my eyes. The humans had created hell on their own planet. The small judge was shaking. But surely this was unusual? Surely most humans aren't capable of such things. That's what we thought. But Professor Burke explained that the capacity for both great good and great evil exists in all humans. The same species that created those death camps also created the soldiers who died to stop them. Zethkri looked at each judge. And then, just as the war was ending, they created the most terrifying weapon of all. Professor Burke told us about something called the atomic bomb. One bomb that could destroy an entire city. The tree judge's leaves rustled. One bomb, one bomb. They dropped it on a city called Hiroshima. 80,000 people died instantly. The heat was so intense that people were vaporized, leaving only shadows burned into the ground. A second bomb destroyed another city called Nagasaki. The blue judge's voice was shaky. They actually used these weapons? They used them to end the war. Professor Burke said the alternative would have been to invade Japan, which would have cost millions of lives. So they chose to kill hundreds of thousands to save millions. Zethkri's claws drummed against the table. But here's the truly terrifying part. After they created these weapons that could destroy their entire world, they kept fighting smaller wars. They chose to fight with conventional weapons instead of using the ultimate ones. The small judge looked confused. That sounds like restraint. It was restraint. And that restraint made them more dangerous, not less. Professor Burke explained that humans who could destroy their own planet but chose not to were humans who understood the true cost of war. They had learned to use exactly the right amount of force, no more and no less. The tree judge's voice was barely audible. What else did she tell you? She told us about Vietnam, where American soldiers fought in jungles against an enemy they could barely see. She told us about Afghanistan, where Soviet soldiers learned that superior weapons mean nothing if your enemy is willing to die for their homeland. Zethkri's eyes gleamed. She told us about the Cold War, where two superpowers pointed nuclear weapons at each other for 40 years, but never used them. They fought through smaller conflicts, proxy wars, always testing each other, but never. Crossing the final line, the blue judge leaned back. And you believe this made them better warriors? I believe this made them perfect warriors. By the time we encountered them in space, they had learned every possible way to fight. They had experience with every type of conflict, every kind of terrain, every level of technology. Zethkri's voice grew grim. They had learned to fight in trenches and in cities, on beaches and in jungles, in deserts and in mountains. They had learned to fight with swords. The judges sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, the tree creature spoke. You've told us about their history. Now tell us about the actual war. Tell us how you were defeated. Zethkri's laugh was bitter and cold. Defeated? We were not defeated. We were destroyed. There is a difference. The blue judge shifted uncomfortably. The report said your forces were simply outmaneuvered. Superior human technology and tactics. Superior tactics, yes, but not superior technology. Our ships were faster, our weapons more powerful, our shields stronger. On paper, we should have won every battle. Zethkri's claws scraped the metal table. But wars are not won on paper. The small judge leaned forward. Then how did they beat you? They beat us the same way their ancestors had beaten every enemy for thousands of years. With strategy, sacrifice, and an understanding of warfare that we could never match. Zethkri closed his eyes for a moment. The first real battle was at Proxima Centauri. Admiral Corenstone commanded the human fleet. We had 200 ships. She had 80. By every military calculation, we should have crushed her forces in less than an hour. The tree judge made a note. What happened? She used a tactic that was older than our civilization. She pretended to retreat, drawing our ships into a narrow passage between two asteroids. We thought we had her trapped. We thought victory was certain. Zethkri's voice grew darker. But when we entered the passage, we found ourselves surrounded. She had hidden ships behind the asteroids. More ships came from above and below. We were caught in what her ancestors would have called a pincer movement. The blue judge frowned. That's a simple ambush. Surely your commanders should have seen it coming. Should have, yes. But we had never encountered real deception in battle. Before, when we conquered other worlds, we relied on superior firepower and numbers. No one had ever tried to trick us. We had no experience with enemies who lied. The small judge's ears twitched. The humans lied? The humans did what they had always done. They made us see what they wanted us to see. Admiral Stone broadcast fake distress signals. She made her ships appear damaged when they were not. She used electronic warfare to hide her true numbers. Zethkri's eyes opened, and they were filled with something that might have been admiration. But the most brilliant part was what happened next. When our ships tried to retreat, we found the passage blocked. She had moved asteroids into position while we were distracted. We were trapped in a killing box. The tree judge's leaves rustled. How many ships did you lose? All of them. 200 ships destroyed in less than 3 hours. Admiral Stone lost only 12 vessels. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. The blue judge set down his pen. But surely that was just one engagement. One lucky victory. Lucky? Zethkri's laugh was harsh. There was nothing lucky about it. Admiral Stone had studied a battle called Cannae, fought by a human general named Hannibal over 2,000 years earlier. She used the same basic strategy. Adapted for space warfare, the small judge looked confused. She copied an ancient battle. She improved on an ancient battle. The humans take the best ideas from their history and make them better. They never throw away knowledge, no matter how old it is. Zethkri leaned forward. After Proxima Centauri, we thought it was a fluke. We sent a larger fleet to their colony. World at Kepler 186. This time we brought 500 ships and surrounded the planet completely. There was no way they could escape or trick us again. The tree judge made a note. What happened there? They didn't try to escape. Colonel Ryan Hayes commanded the ground forces on that world. When our ships arrived, he did something we had never seen before. He invited us to land. The blue judge's skin turned a lighter shade. He invited you to invade? He sent a message to our fleet commander. He said his forces were outnumbered and outgunned. He offered to surrender if we would treat his soldiers with honor. Our commander thought it was a trap, but our sensors showed only a few thousand human troops on the surface. Zethkri's claws extended, so we landed 50,000 soldiers. More than enough to overwhelm any resistance. We expected a quick victory and an easy occupation. The small judge's eyes were wide, but it wasn't easy. It was the beginning of a nightmare that lasted 6 months. The humans had not surrendered. They had gone underground. Literally underground. They had spent months digging tunnels, preparing hidden bases, stockpiling weapons and supplies. The tree judge shifted uncomfortably. Guerrilla warfare? Guerrilla warfare perfected by 10,000 years of practice. Colonel Hayes had studied every insurgency in human history. Vietnam, Afghanistan, the French resistance, the Spanish guerrillas who fought Napoleon. He knew exactly how to fight a larger, better-equipped enemy. Zethkri's voice grew quieter. Our soldiers would patrol during the day and find nothing. At night, humans would emerge from hidden tunnels and attack our camps. They would kill a few guards, destroy some equipment, and disappear before we could respond. The blue judge made a note. Surely you could track them down. We tried. But they knew the terrain better than we did. They had prepared the battlefield for months before we arrived. Every hill, every forest, every building had been turned into a potential ambush site. The small judge leaned forward. What was the worst part? The worst part was that they never gave us a fair fight. In our culture, warriors face each other. Openly, we believed in honor, in facing your enemy and proving your strength. But the humans had learned that honor is a luxury you cannot afford when fighting for survival. Zethkri's eyes grew distant. They would attack us when we were sleeping, eating, or wounded. They would pretend to be civilians and then attack when we got close. They would use our own rules of engagement against us. The tree judge's leaves rustled with agitation. They broke the rules of war. They followed their own rules. Rules learned from thousands of years of fighting against superior enemies. They had learned that when you are outnumbered and outgunned, you use every advantage you can find. The blue judge frowned. Give us a specific example. Major Susan Clark. She commanded a human ship called the Liberty Bell. When our fleet cornered her near an asteroid field, she did something that still gives me nightmares. Zethkri's voice became very quiet. She rammed her ship into our flagship. Just before impact, she detonated her reactor. The explosion destroyed our command ship and damaged 6 others. She killed herself and her entire crew to save the rest of her fleet. The small judge's ears drooped. She committed suicide? She committed sacrifice. There is a difference. Suicide is about ending your own pain. Sacrifice is about saving others. Major Clark died so that 40 other human ships could escape. Her sacrifice saved thousands of lives. The tree judge made a note. Surely this was unusual behavior. It was typical behavior. The humans had learned that sometimes one person's death can save many lives. They had been taught this lesson by every generation of warriors who came before them. Zethkri looked at each judge in turn. Lieutenant Paul Green held a corridor on the space station Harmony for 6 hours while his unit evacuated civilians. He was wounded 3 times but kept fighting until everyone else was safe. He died, but 200 people lived. The blue judge's voice was shaky. How many of your soldiers did you lose on Kepler 186? All of them. 50,000 troops. Gone. Some killed in ambush. Some died from diseases the humans had deliberately spread. Some just disappeared into the tunnels and were never seen. Again, the small judge was trembling. But you had orbital support. You could have bombed them from space. We tried. But bombing your own occupied territory is difficult. The humans had taken hostages, civilian prisoners from our previous conquests. If we bombed the planet, we would kill our own people. Zethkri's claws drummed against the table. And the humans knew this? They used our own ethics against us. They knew we wouldn't massacre civilians to get to them, so they hid among the civilians and used them as shields. The tree judge's bark-like skin had gone very pale. They used innocent people as protection. They used every tool available to them. In their history, they had learned that desperate times required desperate measures. When you are fighting for the survival of your species, conventional morality becomes a luxury you cannot afford. The blue judge set down his pen. What happened at the final battle? The final battle was at Kepler 442. General Patricia Moore commanded the human forces. We brought everything we had left. 800 ships, the largest fleet in Saurian history. We were going to end this war once and for all. Zethkri's voice became almost a whisper. General Moore did something that combined tactics from a dozen different periods of human history. She used Roman discipline, Greek strategy, medieval siege tactics, modern electronic warfare, and guerrilla techniques all at the same time. The small judge leaned forward. How? She turned the entire solar system into a weapon. Her forces had been preparing for months, placing mines, hiding ships, setting up communication networks. When we arrived, we thought we were attacking a small human fleet. We discovered we were entering a carefully prepared killing ground. The tree judge's leaves rustled. What happened to your fleet? Nothing, everything. We were not destroyed by superior weapons or larger numbers. We were destroyed by superior knowledge, knowledge gained from 10,000 years of warfare. Knowledge passed down from generation to generation of human warriors. The three judges sat in complete silence. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air recycling system. Finally, the blue judge spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You're telling us that we lost because we underestimated their history? Zethkri's yellow eyes fixed on each judge in turn. You lost because you never understood what history means to a species that remembers everything? Every battle they ever fought taught them something new. Every defeat made them stronger. Every victory showed them a better way to win. The small judge's ears were flat against his head. But they're just one species. How could they be so much better at war than the rest of us? Because the rest of us never had to fight for survival on our homeworlds. We conquered other planets, yes, but we never faced extinction. We never had to learn that defeat means death. Zethkri leaned back in his chair, the chains around his wrists clinking softly. The humans spent their entire history fighting each other. Every generation learned from the last. Every culture developed new ways to kill and new ways to survive. They tested every possible strategy against enemies who were just as smart and just as desperate as they were. The tree judge's leaves rustled nervously. You're saying their civil wars made them stronger? I'm saying their civil wars were their training. When brother fights brother, when the same species uses every advantage against itself, the survivors become incredibly dangerous. The humans never fought primitive enemies. They always fought opponents who knew all their tricks, understood all their weaknesses. Zethkri's voice grew quieter. Do you understand what this means? For thousands of years, the humans were their own worst enemies. They developed weapons, tactics, and strategies designed to defeat people exactly like themselves. When we came to conquer them, we found ourselves facing an enemy that had been preparing for us without even knowing we existed. The blue judge made a shaky note. But surely there must have been something we could have done differently. We could have listened to Professor Burke. We could have paid attention when she told us their stories. We could have understood that. We were not fighting a young species. We were fighting the inheritors of the most brutal military tradition in the galaxy. The small judge's voice was barely audible. What do you think will happen now? Zethkri's laugh was cold and empty. Now? Now the humans will do what they have always done when they win a war. They will study it. They will analyze every battle, every decision, every mistake. They will learn from our failures and add that knowledge to their vast library of warfare. The tree judge shifted uncomfortably. You think they will attack other worlds? I think they will prepare for the next war. Because there is always a next war. The humans know this better than anyone. They have never had a lasting peace, so they never stop preparing for conflict. Zethkri's claws drummed against the table. Right now, human generals are studying how we fought. They are learning our tactics, understanding our weaknesses, preparing for the day when they might face an enemy like us again. But next time, they will be ready from the beginning. The blue judge set down his pen with trembling fingers. Are they really that dangerous? They are more dangerous than you can imagine. We fought them when they were divided, when they had only recently unified their world. We caught them at their weakest moment, and they still destroyed us. Zethkri's eyes gleamed with something that might have been fear, but now they are united. Now they have a common enemy to focus on. Now they have learned that there are other species in the galaxy, species that might threaten their survival. The small judge's ears drooped. What are you saying? I'm saying that we have awakened something that should have been left alone. We have given the humans a reason to turn their attention outward. We have shown them that their world is not safe, that there are enemies among the stars. The tree judge's bark-like skin had gone pale. You think they will become conquerors? I think they will become whatever they need to become to ensure their survival. If that means becoming conquerors, then yes. The humans have never been afraid to do what is necessary. Zethkri leaned forward, his chains scraping against the table. Do you know what General Patricia Moore said after the final battle? When she accepted our surrender? The judges shook their heads. She said, "Thank you for the lesson." She thanked us for teaching them how to fight in space. She was already thinking about the next war, the next enemy, the next challenge. The blue judge's voice was shaky. She thanked you? She thanked us for making them stronger. That's what humans do. They take every experience, even defeat, and turn it into knowledge. They learn from their enemies as much as they learn from their allies. Zethkri's voice grew softer. Professor Burke told me something before they transferred her to a human ship. She said that in their language, the word crisis comes from an ancient word that means both danger and opportunity. The humans see every challenge as a chance to become better. The small judge was trembling. What did she mean? She meant that we had given them the greatest gift possible. We had shown them their weaknesses, forced them to adapt, made them stronger than they were before. We thought we were conquering them. We were actually training them. The tree judge's leaves rustled with agitation. But surely they will be content with victory. Surely they will want peace now. Zethkri's laugh was bitter. Peace? The humans have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. They know that peace only lasts as long as you are strong enough to defend it. The blue judge leaned back in his chair. So what happens next? Next, the humans will build more ships, train more soldiers, develop new weapons. They will prepare for threats that don't even exist yet. They will be ready for enemies they haven't met, wars they haven't fought. Zethkri's claws extended slightly. And they will remember us. Every tactical mistake we made, every strategic error, every moment of weakness. They will study our defeat so thoroughly that no future enemy will be able to use the same tactics against them. The small judge's voice was barely a whisper. Are we doomed? We are finished as a military power. Our fleets are destroyed, our warriors are dead or captured, our empire is broken, but the humans are not vindictive. They do not seek revenge for its own sake. The tree judge looked confused. What do you mean? I mean they will probably let U.S. live. They will demand our surrender, our submission, our promise never to threaten them again. But they will not exterminate us. That would be wasteful, and humans hate waste. Zethkri's voice grew thoughtful. Professor Burke told me that in their history, many of their greatest enemies eventually became their strongest allies. The humans understand that today's enemy might be tomorrow's friend, if treated with the right mixture of strength and mercy. The blue judge made a note. So you think we might have a future? I think we might have a future as their subjects, as junior partners in whatever empire they choose to build. As students learning from the greatest military minds in the galaxy. The small judge's ears perked up slightly. Students? The humans love to teach. They have schools, universities, academies where they share their knowledge. If we prove that, we can learn that we can be trusted. They might teach us some of what they know. Zethkri's eyes grew distant. But we will never be their equals in warfare. That position was earned through 10,000 years of conflict, paid for with billions of lives, written in blood and sacrifice across the history of their world. The tree judge's voice was thoughtful. And the other species in the galaxy? What about them? The other species will learn, as we have learned. Some will challenge the humans and be destroyed. Others will submit and be spared. A few might even become allies and share in their strength. Zethkri looked at each judge in turn, but make no mistake. The galaxy has changed forever. The humans are no longer a young species learning to walk among the stars. They are the apex, predators of space, and they have only just begun to show their true strength. The blue judge's voice was barely audible. What should we tell the coalition? Tell them the truth. Tell them that we encountered a species that has been preparing for war since before our civilizations existed. Tell them that we fought the inheritors of Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon. Tell them that we never stood a chance. Zethkri's claws scraped the table one final time. And tell them this, if they are wise, they will approach the humans with respect, not fear. The humans can be terrible enemies, but they can also be valuable friends. The choice is ours to make. The small judge's voice was shaking. And if we choose poorly? If we choose poorly, we will learn why the humans have a saying, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And human history is full of empires that thought they were too strong to fall. The room fell silent again. The three judges looked at each other, then at the alien warrior who had just shattered their understanding of the galaxy. Finally, the blue judge spoke. Guard, take the prisoner back to his cell. As Zethkri was led away, the three judges sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend what they had learned. Outside the detention facility, human ships patrolled the space around the coalition flagship, their crews already studying their next potential opponents. Always preparing for the next war. The galaxy would never be the same.